Well, you've seen the posters, puzzles, and app art. And this is about what I've been doing for the past 50 years, more or less. But this is the first time I've ever described what I do to a general audience. And you've seen you probably know by now what I do because you've seen the 5 beautiful display cases downstairs. So I don't have to describe it very much. But in those display cases, you may have noticed the word puzzle does not appear on the labels, but I emphasize in the display the names and the types of wood. But we will talk about puzzles nevertheless. It's just that at the very start, when I started in 1968, I adopted the term app art, the polyhedral art that comes apart, and I've changed it sometimes to geometric art, always using app art and in various forms. So yes, they are puzzles. And the second thing's unusual is that that's the first time that I've put out a display in a museum sort of setting, first time ever. So there's a third thing. This talk is going to be in 2 parts. This program is supposed to be about an hour, but I'll talk for about half an hour, and then the second half will be hands-on. We're going to lay all these things out here, and you're free to handle them and even take them apart if you want. As far as I know, that has never been done before in a puzzle museum. And I think the reason is obvious. What puzzle museum has the staff to put them back together, not to mention replacing the broken pieces or the missing ones? But that won't be a problem here, I'm sure. All my family is here, and they're all expert at putting them back together again if you need help. Now, as far as question and answer, I don't like to do that during a talk because there have to be questions that only one person is interested in. However, I'm glad to answer them. So at the end of the half hour, I will mingle with the crowd. I'll put on my mask, and you can ask me as many questions if you want. So let's get started. I have brought along about 25 items to describe that will help me with my talk because, as I said, I had no practice at this. But years ago, I started putting together what I call my compendium. And this is about 250 pages, more or less, and it describes about 600 or 700 odd designs. We brought along just a sample. You've seen samples of 30 of them in the glass cases, and there'll be about 25 more that you haven't seen, but there are lots more that are described in here. And I now have a website, and I'm going to we'll pass these around. I think should be about enough to go around. You could probably use the little dish if you want. Oh, you could, yeah, pass them out. If there's not enough, maybe you can share. But I think I brought along about 30. Maybe a little short, but it's mostly to tell you my name, which you already know, and my website. I now have a website with all of this information on it, and it's simply my name, 13 letters, STEWARTCOFFIN.com. And that also has an illustration on it. Okay, well, I'm not going to talk a lot about woodworking techniques. Some of you may be interested, and I'll go over it briefly. When I started, I'll tell you how I got started. It's a long story, and I'll try to make it short. As a child, I was most interested in mechanical things, like tinker toys, and also in tools for making my own. And my parents recognized that, so they encouraged it. It was obvious that I was going to be an engineer. So I graduated from the University of Massachusetts in 1953 my first job was at the MIT Digital Computer Laboratory. Best job I think I ever had. Unfortunately, it only lasted a year and a half, and most of us were transferred to MIT Lincoln Lab in Lexington. And we did work for the Air Force on continental air defense. Well, it was an interesting job in a way, but not what I would prefer to have been doing. But that only lasted a few years, and then we were transferred again to MITRE Corporation in Bedford. I didn't like that very much, just working on government contracts. So I got a job working for a dynamic controls company in Cambridge as a circuit design engineer. That company was in the brink of failure, and I was too. And my wife was a librarian. We lived in Arlington Heights, and we had 3 little girls. And she wanted to move to Lincoln, where the schools were supposed to be much better. And I needed a better place to work, because I wanted to try to living with my own hands. And we were very active, my wife and I, with the AMC canoeing and other canoeing groups as well. And I got interested in making my own canoe. So I thought, I'll try to make a living making canoes and kayaks and paddles. Well, we bought a dilapidated farmhouse in Lincoln on Old Sudbury Road with 9 acres of land and some buildings, including 2 greenhouses. I converted one of the 2 greenhouses into a beautiful workshop, and I made canoes and kayaks for about 5 years. That was, and also we had to take quite a cut in income doing that. So we raised our own fruits and vegetables, and we had a farm stand, and we sold them. And by that time, some of the daughters were old enough so they could participate in that too. And I have a book about it, Tipcart Tales. And this is not on my website because it's still unprinted, collected copies in Amherst. So I just have this one copy to show. The boat business was pretty good. Not as lucrative as my engineering work. The problem was that I was working with toxic chemicals, and they were making me sick. And I was concerned about my family too, so I quit that. I was looking for something else to do in 1968, and I had my family background in art, especially my mother's side, and also my father's, and I had a background in mathematics, so I thought maybe some sort of geometrical sculpture I could produce. And so I worked on that, and then I had an inspiration. I remembered a book that my father had given me 18 years earlier when I was a college student. He knew I was interested in math. He gave me this book, Mathematical Snapshots. This is not the original one, I know ever. This is the later paperback by Hugo Steinhaus, but I remembered, there's a bookmark in here, the Rhotic dodecahedron. And I brought one. It's, yeah, they may ought to pass that around. I made that one out of wood recently just for this talk. And
thank you for
that got me thinking. So I made one, not that one, I lost that one, but I made one. And I was intrigued by the fact that I discovered it could be enclosed by 12 triangular sticks. This one I made about a week ago, and it comes apart. I think it comes apart. Well, it did. And there's a Rhotic dodecahedron inside. Here it comes. Yeah, here. So I made one of those, I guess, many years ago. I no longer have it. And then I discovered that it could be converted from triangular sticks into hexagonal sticks. And I did not have any woodworking capability at that time. I just had a few tools that any homeowner has, but I pictured in my mind, and this is a much later one, made in 4 fancy woods. But I had a neighbor, next door neighbor, Fred Wilbur, who was an expert machinist. And I had him machine the shape of one of these notched pieces. Each piece has 2 notches in it, hexagonal notches. And he machined it in steel. I had quite a bit of experience with epoxy, so I cast the pieces in epoxy, and I actually have one of the original ones here, cast in epoxy. And kids were fascinated by it, and they took one to school one day to show their friends, and it caught the attention of the Lincoln School librarian, Heidi Kent, and she recognized the potential as a puzzle. Well, it already was, but the potential as maybe commercially possibilities. She put me in touch with an acquaintance of hers, Tom Atwater in Concord, whose job was an agent for puzzle and game makers. Now, I don't think there were any others in the whole country, and what luck, right next door, Tom Atwater. We immediately became friends, we drew up a contract, and he tried to market this puzzle we called Hectix, Hectix. Well, lo and behold, he marketed the 3M company right away. They paid me an advance for the royalty, and they were going to injection mold it in styrene, and they did, and they sold 100,000 of them in the next few years.
That's great.
So I received a royalty of about 5%. The wholesale price was $2.50. Retail was $5. So that was more money than I made making canoes. So I liquidated all the paddle in the boat business and decided to be an inventor of puzzles. And that was 1968. I worked on it hard for a year, and I did, oh yes, okay, good. This is the actual, one of the styrene. They look pretty much the same. That one was epoxy, and this one is injection molded styrene. And here's the funny thing. They were made right nearby in Clinton, Massachusetts, by Nylon Products. And if you know anything about injection molding, they had a 12-cavity mold that closes, it squirts the stuff into it, it cools for a little bit, opens up, and out pops 12 puzzle pieces. Mass production, zip, zip. One little problem. They had to be assembled with chemical union workers. And yes, that would be the biggest expense probably. It cost about 25 cents to an injection mold. And so they had a meeting in Clinton, big executive meeting. I attended, and they said, what to do about the assembly? I said, I have a solution. Send them to my plant in Lincoln, and we will assemble them for 4 cents each. Good. What they didn't know was that my plant consisted of a picnic table in our backyard, my 3 girls' summer vacation. They did several hundred per day, or probably 1,000 per day. And I paid them 2 cents each. Everybody came out ahead.
That's great.
Well, on the strength of that, I decided that I was going to be an inventor, and I worked on that for a year. I didn't come up with much. This is one line, the Geologics, also made by Nylon Products. They got interested in it too, and they were helpful in making suggestions to me, and I would help them. These were also injection molded in clear styrene this time. Some of them were opaque, but these three here are clear, and they're in the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, translucent, and the secondary colors appear, of course, by transmission of light. That was kind of neat. But to save molding costs, all 6 pieces had to be identical. So they're really just toys. That's a very simple puzzle. And I don't know how many were made. I did receive a royalty, but there they are. I'll say a little bit. So I set myself up as a woodworker. I had a table saw already, and for my work, didn't really need many tools. I had a belt sander and a drill press, and basically that was it. I have here, before we go into that, I brought something else to show you. I'm not going to tell much about the history of puzzles because there isn't much, at least the type that I know. There are a lot of different kinds of puzzles, but I'm talking about the geometric ones. And I happened to take an interest in these at a very early age. This was before World War II, which of course was 1941. So these were probably around 1940. These were Christmas presents from my father to me, and these were made in Japan. And this is a very early version of the famous 6-piece burr. I'm not going to tell a lot about 6-piece burr, but it's a famous design. And this is one that's been in the public domain for a long time. So there they are. I still have them. These sold mail order by the Johnson Smith Company of Racine, Wisconsin, for 10 cents each post-paid. The big one was 15 cents, and I still have a copy of that ad. It's in one of my books, in case you don't believe it. Think of it. Talk about inflation. 10 cents post-paid. I wonder what the postage would be now. Well, I'll talk a little bit about woodworking techniques, but not a whole lot. I brought along 2 measuring instruments. If you go into a factory these days where things are made and assembled like automotive, you won't see anybody measuring anything, obviously. It's all set out ahead of time. And same with my work. I would never have a measuring instrument when I was working. However, these were very useful getting the setup accurate. Sawing jig, I brought one. I got rid of my stuff a couple of years ago. I retired, but I made this one just to show you. And this is actually, was used to make that rhombic dodecahedron that was passed around. It's a sawing jig. It slides in the miter grooves of the table saw, 45 degrees this way and 45 degrees that way. It's hard to explain, but you probably get the idea. I have to tell you, the micrometer, I use these measuring instruments when buying wood. I buy a lot of hobby woods from places like Rockler or Woodcraft Supply. I would always check the thickness, because if it was less than 275 thousandths, I couldn't use it. If it was a little over, I could have it planed down to 3/4. So I would check it with a micrometer. And sometimes I had wood that was a little over, and I would take it to Customs Brothers in Lexington. I don't know if they're still there. They're still there, Customs? I don't think so. Anyways, they had no experience with plating anything to my requirements of expected accuracy. So I insisted on being there with my micrometer while they were plating. And this was against their policy, but they made an exception for me. So if the workman started planting a piece of valuable lumber, and I was checking it carefully to make sure he didn't take off too much, he saw the micrometer. He said, "Listen, buddy, this ain't no machine shop." Okay, let's oh yes, this thing goes along with it too. I have the, yes, this is part of the deal, and this too. This thing, this is how the pieces were made for that one that was passed around. You see it goes in here, like this, goes in the saw, and it goes, you go, zip, and then you turn it 180 degrees, zip, and you end up with a six-sided block, and then four of them used. And then these two, very accurate, very important part of my work is accurate gluing jigs. This one is made out of aluminum, and so it's stable with changes in humidity, 3/4 of an inch exactly. And the other one, this is another gluing jig. It's right angle. This goes in it here. It's used to glue this up and make it accurate right angles. This is wall tile, ceramic wall tile, so it's easy to clean and very accurately, and 3/4 inch plywood, so it's stable, exact 90 degrees corner. All right, now, let's see. I have some notes here that so I don't forget too much. Well, as I said, I decided to become a woodworker, and I started out with, let's see now, this is, okay, yes. I started out with some simple designs. In some of my literature that's available, it even shows my early brochures. You can see this one here was made in this jig. It's just square with 7 pieces. And here's some other examples of what I call app art, the polyhedral art that comes apart. This is the hexagonal prisms puzzle, 6 pieces. And these sort of things is what I really concentrated on, but there are many others as well. And this one has 12 triangular sticks, very similar to that one that I showed at the start. And some of these are fairly so simple that you'd hardly call them puzzles. I didn't try to make exceedingly difficult puzzles because, for one thing, I consider them works of art, and what good is a work of art if it's in pieces? So, but there was an exception to that later, I'll tell you about in a minute. My kids used to play in my workshop when they were little, and they used to pick up scrap pieces that were left over sometimes on the floor even, and glue them together and make puzzles for their friends. One time they made one with 2 pieces come apart. Here it is here. Forgot the name of it. What was the name of it? Pennyhedron.
Penny's down there.
This one has, this one has a penny in it still. This was their idea, not mine. I tell you.
That's great.
Now, you think it's so simple. How could it possibly be a puzzle? Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to take apart unless you know the trick. I'm using 3 fingers of each hand. Hardly anybody would do that. You use 2 fingers of each hand. All you're doing is pressing it together, and it will never come apart. And so, of course, they got very good at that. So I made one that came apart with 2 fingers. They couldn't take it apart. So we played with that a lot. There were a dozen different versions of this thing. They were different shapes, in different numbers of pieces, but that's the basic pentahedron. This one I'm holding now is a little different category. This one here is called the coordinate motion design. And you cannot take it apart. Well, you can take it apart easily, but putting it back together, you almost need 3 hands to do it because you have to move 3 pieces in unison to do it. I won't, well, maybe we'll demonstrate it later. It's no easy thing. Yeah, well, we got to move along here now because, yeah. What I'm doing now is discussing the different categories briefly, and the next category is fitting pieces into a box or a tray. I brought 2 samples with a tray. This one in particular became famous. I mentioned it. Did I mention at the start? I got to start when Martin. I guess I forgot to mention my business started out with craft shows, which were a lot of fun, but we didn't have very many sales because they were just on weekends mostly. But then I got a big break in 1968 when Martin Gardner and his Mathematical Recreations Call mentioned me in Scientific American, which was distributed worldwide at that point, especially because of his column. So I got more business than I could handle like that. And then in the next year, 1969, we got the fine woodworking. There were several. This one came out, and I think over the years, they ran 3 articles. I'll put these out and look at them. But anyways, Martin Gardner and we became good friends, and I made this puzzle called a 4-fit. It has 4 simple pieces that fit into a tray. And the pieces are simple, but the solution is anything but. He could not solve it. He, the world's expert on puzzles, he could not solve this puzzle for 2 weeks. And he finally wrote to me and asked for the solution. I renamed it Martin's Menace. This puzzle has become sort of famous because of that. You can play with it if you want. Now we're getting back. Oh yeah, well, here I'll just mention briefly the one with dowels with pins and holes. All you need for this one is really the drill press, and that was a whole category in itself. And I've got to say a little bit about fancy woods. I became a wood collector at an early time. Early on, I was using just common hardwoods. This one is Honduras mahogany, but I needed multicolors, and I became a wood collector. And here now, on to the Jupiter. This required 6 dissimilar woods. So I became sort of an expert on exotic woods, and I collected them from all over the world. I joined the International Wood Collectors Society, which was a very useful source of information on where to get them. Had some interesting stories about my wood collecting. I'm not going to go into them now, but they're in my book. And this right here is the super duper Jupiter. This is fairly new. This is one of the last designs that I came up with a few years ago, and it's done very well. It has 30 different kinds of wood. And it's rather challenging because there are 2 challenges: assemble them so that all the woods are matched. That's easy. And assemble them a second way so that none of the woods are matched. That's very hard. Now, okay. This is the, I mentioned how I got started with the rhombic dodecahedron. This is rhombic trichondrihedron, which is the inside of one of these. And finally, we come back to what I love to describe best, and that is polyhedral art. This is a triangular prism puzzle. It's one of my favorites. There's 4 triangular prisms, one each kind of wood, walnut, purdue, poplar, and satinwood. And how did I ever invent that? Well, I didn't invent it. I don't consider myself an inventor. I discovered it. I just started gluing things together, and lo and behold, something as interesting and intriguing as that just emerges. Here's one more example. The double hexagonal prism puzzle. The normal first one had 4 faces, but this one has 8. Just by gluing these basic pieces together, something like this emerges. It never ceases to interest me. I spent so much time playing with these that I actually, when I should have been doing something more productive. But I really enjoyed this work so much. Here's one final example. It is one of my favorites. It's the scrambled scorpions. Six dissimilar pieces, and surprisingly difficult to assemble. This one is made much easier by having woods that match. One final category I forgot to mention, the topological puzzles. These are not geometrical at all, obviously, and it was a useful way to use up wood scraps. This is not my invention. It dates way back over 100 years, but we called it the buttonhole puzzle. The kids made them. I paid them 1 cent each for drilling holes. The string is nylon, LL Bean 50-pound fish line with a little bit of glue on the knot to hold it. At craft shows, my kids would put these on someone's buttonhole and challenge them to remove it. You think that would be easy, wouldn't you? Well, it's not. And sometimes they stayed on there a long time, I guess. And of course, sometimes the joke was they felt obliged, they couldn't remove it, they felt obliged to buy them. And these were made in exotic woods. This one happens to be rosewood. 25 cents each, not bad for a souvenir. And even had my stamp on it, APR. Some of them did, this one doesn't. I think I lost that stamp, but I had a stamp made. Anyways, that, okay, now before we close out, I'm going to digress for a bit and tell you that, I'll tell you, I'm just going to say that I have done many other things in my life besides, and in the introduction to my website, I say that actually, I'll read it. I didn't bother. Anyways, I quote it. I said that I'd rather be known as a writer rather than an inventor of puzzles. And I've done quite a bit of writing, and I don't think this is a place to go over it, but I brought samples in here. This, of course, is, there are several books. This is early one, Oxford University Press, no longer in print. This one is still in print, Geometric Puzzle Design. Here's 3 years in the Army. That's my grandfather's Civil War experience. Obviously must be a mistake. My grandfather, Civil War, impossible. It's not impossible, it's true. You figure it out. There's four coincidences, 4 circumstances, one of them being that I'm 92, and you have to guess the others. He was in the Civil, well, he went in underage, the age of a soldier, and he's 18, and he was 17. He lied about his age. And my father was born when he was 45, and I was born when my father was 41. That's the whole story. Tall Trees and Wild Bees, that was my childhood in North Amherst. Latch Truth Journals, this is one that's closest to my heart of all. This is about our canoeing experiences in the North Country, mostly in Canada. And that's on my website. 3 years in the Army, that's the same thing again. Black Spruce Country, these are fictional stories about canoeing, that's on my website. Portage Trails is the 11-act play website. Nice illustration, that's a sunrise over Maniac Lakes, taken in 19. And then the last pile is a bunch of miscellaneous stuff you can sort over. So that's, oh, one more. The AMC New England Canoeing Guide, my wife and I made the first edition of this in 1965. Okay, done. Yes, well, that concludes the first part. So now you're welcome.